Praise be to Jesus Christ. Once again, a warm welcome to you, my dear friends. Let us continue our journey through Saint Faustina's diary. Today we read from page 76 to 80. The vow of poverty. The vow of poverty is the voluntary renunciation of the right over property or to the use of such property with the purpose of pleasing God. What objects does a vow of poverty concern? All those goods and those objects which appertain to the community. We have no longer any right over anything that has been given to us. Once it has been accepted, whether an article or money, all these donations and presents which may have been given to us out of gratitude or in any way or in any other way belong by right to the community. We cannot make use without violating the vow of any wages we may receive for work or even any annuity. What do we break or violate the vow in a matter which entails the 7th commandments? We break or violate it when, without permission, we take for ourselves anything that belongs to the house. When, without permission, we attain something in order to appropriate it, and when, without authorization, we sell or exchange something that belongs to the community, when we make use of an object for some other purpose than that intended by the superior, when we give to or accept from another anything whatsoever without permission, when we negligence, we destroy or damage something, when in going from one house to another we take something with us without permission, in a situation where the vow is broken, the religious is bound to make restitution to the community. The virtue of poverty. This is an evangelical virtue which impels the heart to detach itself from temporal things. The religious, in virtue of his profession, is strictly obliged to it. When do we sin against the virtue of poverty? When we desire something contrary to this virtue, when we become attached to something, and when we make use of superfluous things. How many degrees of poverty are there, and what are they? There are, in practice, 4 degrees of poverty. For one who is a professed religious, to dispose of nothing without the consent of the superiors, the strict matter of the vow, to avoid superfluities and be content with necessities. This pertains to the virtue, to readily content oneself with things of inferior quality in what concerns one's self, clothing, nourishment, etc., and to experience this contentment interiorly, to rejoice in extreme poverty. The vow of chastity. To what does this vow oblige us? To renounce marriage and to avoid everything that is forbidden by the 6th and 9th commandments. Is a fault against the virtue a violation of the vow? Every fault against the virtue is at the same time a violation of the vow, because here there is no difference as in the case of poverty and obedience, between the vow and the virtue. Is their bad thought a sin? Is every bad thought a sin? No, every bad thought is not a sin. It becomes so only when the acquiescence of the will and consent are joined to the consideration of the mind. Is there anything over and above sins against chastity which is detrimental to the virtue? Lack of custody of the senses, of the imagination, and the feelings, familiarity, and sentimental friendships are detrimental to the virtue. What are the means by which this virtue may be preserved? To conquer interior temptations with the thought of the presence of God, and moreover to fight without fear, and for exterior temptations to avoid occasions. There are in all 7 principal means to guard the senses, to avoid occasions, to avoid idleness, to remove temptations promptly, to remove oneself from all, and specially particular friendships, the spirit of mortification, and to reveal all these temptations to one's confessor. Besides this, there are also 5 means of preserving this virtue: humility, the spirit of prayer, modesty of the eyes, fidelity to the rule, a sincere devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary. The vow of obedience. The vow of obedience is superior to the first 2. It is to tell the truth or holocaust, and it is more necessary because it forms and animates the monastic body. To what does the vow of obedience oblige us? By the law of obedience, the religious promises to God to be obedient to his legitimate superiors in everything that they will ordain in virtue of the rule. The vow of obedience makes the religious dependent on his superior in virtue of these rules for his whole life and in all his affairs. A religious commits a grave sin against the vow every time he disobeys an order given, in virtue of obedience and of these rules. The virtue of obedience. The virtue of obedience goes further than the vow. It embraces the rules, the regulations, and even the counsels of the superiors. Is the virtue of obedience indispensable for a religious? The virtue of obedience is so indispensable to a religious that even if he were to perform good actions contrary to obedience, these would be evil and without merit. Can we sin gravely against the virtue of obedience? We sin gravely when we scorn the authority or the order of the superior, or when spiritual or temporal harm to the community results from our disobedience. What faults endanger the vow? To be prejudiced against the superior, or to harbor an antipathy for him, murmuring and criticism, tardiness and negligence. The decree of obedience. Prompt and complete fulfillment, the obedience of the will, when the will persuades the intellect to submit to the advice of the superior. To facilitate obedience, Saint Ignatius suggests, moreover, 3 means. Always to see God in our superior, whoever he might be. to justify in itself the order or advice of the superior, to accept each order as an order from God, without examining it or reflecting on it. General means humility. Nothing is difficult for the humble. Diary 94. O my Lord, inflame my heart with love for you, that my spirit may not grow weary amidst the storms, the sufferings and the trials. You see how weak I am. Love can do all. Diary 95. A deeper knowledge of God and the terror of the soul. In the beginning, God lets Himself be known as holiness, justice, goodness. That is to say, mercy. The soul does not come to know this all at once, but piecemeal flashes, that is to say, when God draws near. And this does not last for long, because the soul could not bear such light. During prayer, the soul experiences flashes of this light, which make it impossible to pray as before. Try as it may be, force itself to pray as it did before. All is in vain. It becomes completely impossible for it to continue to pray as it did before it received this light. This light which has touched the soul is alive within it, and nothing can either quench or diminish it. This flash of the knowledge of God draws the soul and enkindles its love for Him. But same flesh at the same time allows the soul to know itself as it is. The soul sees its whole interior in a superior light, and it rises up alarmed and terrified. Still, it does not remain under the effects of terror, but it begins to purify itself, to humble and abase itself before the Lord. These lights become stronger and more frequent. The more the soul is crystallized, the more these lights penetrate it. However, if the soul has responded faithfully and courageously to these first graces, God fills it with His consolations and gives Himself to it in a perceptible manner. At certain moments, the soul, as it were, enters into intimacy with God and greatly rejoices in this. It believes that it has already reached the degree of perfection destined for it, because its defects and faults are asleep within it. And this makes it think that they no longer exist. Nothing seems difficult for it. It is ready for everything. It begins to plunge itself into God and taste the divine delights. It is carried along by grace and does not take account of the fact that the time of trial and testing may come and infect. This state does not last long. Other moments will soon come, I should add there. However, that the soul will respond more faithfully to divine grace if it has a well-informed confessor to whom it can confide everything. Diary 96. Trials sent by God to a soul which is particularly loved by Him. Temptations and darkness, Satan. The soul's love for God is still not such as God would have it. The soul suddenly loses the tangible perception of God's presence. Various defects and imperfections rise up within it, and it must fight them furiously. All her faults lift up their heads, but the soul's vigilance is great. The former awareness of the presence of God gives place to coldness and spiritual dryness. The soul has no taste for spiritual exercises. It cannot pray either in the old way or in the manner in which it had just begun to pray. It struggles this way and that, but can find no satisfaction. God has hidden himself from it, and it can find no consolation in creatures, nor can any of these creatures find a way of consoling it. The soul craves passionately for God, but sees its own misery. It begins to sense God's justice. It seems to it that it has lost all the gifts that God had given it. Its mind is dimmed and darkness fills it. Unspeakable torment begins. The soul tries to explain its state to the confessor, but it is not understood and is assailed by an even greater unrest. Satan begins to work. Diary 97. Faith staggers under the impact. The struggle is fierce. The soul tries hard to cling to God by an act of will. With God's permission, Satan goes even further. Hope and love are put to the test. These temptations are terrible. God supports the soul in secret, so to speak. The soul is not aware of this, but otherwise it would be impossible to stand firm. And God knows very well how much He can allow to befall a soul. The soul is tempted to unbelief in respect to revealed truths and to insincerity towards the confessor. Satan says to it, "Look, no one understands you. Why speak about all this?" Words that terrify it sound in its ears, and it seems to the soul that it is uttering these against God. It sees what it does not want to see. It hears what it does not want to hear. And oh, it is a terrible thing at times like these not to have an experienced confessor. The soul carries the whole burden alone. However, one should make every effort to find, if it is at all possible, a well-informed confessor, for the soul can collapse under the burden and come to the very edge of the precipice. All these trials are heavy and difficult. God does not send them to a soul which has not already been admitted to a deeper intimacy with Him and which has not yet tasted the divine delights. Besides, in this God has His own plans, which for us are impenetrable. God often prepares a soul in this way for His future designs and great works. He wants to try it as pure gold is tried. But this is not yet the end of the testing. There is still the trial of trials, the complete abandonment of the soul of God. Praise be to Jesus Christ. Today we read Diary of Saint Faustina from page 76 to 80. Let us carry this message in our hearts and may the divine assistance be always with us.